So the Crown recently staying the charges against Vice Admiral Mark Norman on the grounds that there was no reasonable chance of conviction. But from the get-go, Norman's team has been suggesting there has been a lot of political interference.
Yes, now they're now saying the decision of the prosecutors not to proceed was taken entirely independently and there was no political interference at all. We have to take their word for it. That's what the Crown prosecutor herself said. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of questions to be asked about how this thing came to trial in the first place and how indeed the prosecution did come to decide that they didn't want to proceed with this. At the very least, it sounds like this thing was massively bungled. If the case was as weak as it now appears, if there was evidence that the defense was able to obtain, which is what the prosecution says, why didn't the prosecution, why didn't the RCMP come across the same information? And even if there were no overt interference, now as you say, that was the case that the defense was preparing to make, and presumably they thought they had evidence that could suggest that. But even if it wasn't overt interference, and of course through the SNC-Lavalin affair we had all kinds of debates about what constituted interference or not, but even if it wasn't a direct order or something of that kind, you could well imagine if the government, if the Privy Council office refers a case to the RCMP saying, we did our investigation, we found these 6 leaks and we've decided these have to be criminally investigated. That would be one of the questions is, did people in the RCMP feel, well, the folks at the very top want this done, maybe we should jump to it? And secondly, did the prosecutors take on a case, the RCMP having laid charges, the prosecutors decide to take the case when they might not have, it being apparently such a slim case, did they shade their opinion because somebody upstairs wanted it? I think there's still a lot of questions to be asked about this. And let's remember, this was the second highest ranking person in the military who was dragged through the mud for 2 years, it would appear, for no reason.
Do you think it is unusual to have charged Mark Norman in the first place?
Extremely unusual. The charge against him was that he had leaked the details of a cabinet discussion. Now, leaks should not happen, but leaks happen all the time. Ottawa runs on leaks. So it's at worst a sort of a misdemeanor, but to trump this up into a criminal charge, first of all. Second of all, there was evidence that all kinds of people could have leaked it. All kinds of people had information, had access to the same information. I believe it was the total eventually was 73 people had access to the same information. So whether they could have really made a case that he and he alone was the person that they needed to focus in on. It just smacked of retribution, that information had come out that embarrassed the government about the way in which yet another procurement decision was being handled, where yet again there appeared to be appeals for regional favoritism that had sympathetic ears in cabinet, and that this was when this story came out, it was embarrassing to the government. To then take this vendetta against a highly honored, highly distinguished military man in retribution for that, and as I say, for that to have, for the prosecution and the RCMP to have participated in that on what appears to be very slim evidence, it really cries out for further inquiries.
The prosecution said that they presented this information to the Crown 2 months ago, so back in March. So A, why did it take all this time to drop these charges? And I guess B, will we see this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is, why did it take so long for this information to come to light? Why did it take so long for the Crown to act on it? Why are they just doing this now? I don't know what the answers to that, but they're questions that are worth asking. If we had had a trial, as wearying as that would have been for Vice Admiral Norman, we would, at least from the public interest standpoint, maybe have had some answers to some of these questions about how this whole thing came to happen. I think the best chance now, and it's a slim one, is if Vice Admiral Norman brings a civil suit against the government for, I guess it would be wrongful investigation. I'm not sure what the proper term would be. He may have grounds to sue the government. Whether he'll choose to pursue that or not, I'm not sure at all. He may just wish to wash his hands of the whole thing. But that would certainly be another area in which you might have further information. There is, of course, another person who has been charged with leaking information in the same affair. Maybe in that trial, if it goes to trial, there will be further revelations. I don't know. Final point is, Vice Admiral Norman has said he's going to give a lengthy statement of some kind or interview. I'm not sure exactly how he's going to bring out his side of the story, but presumably there'll be more to be learned from that.
With the potential of calling all these ministers as witnesses to testify, this could have been very damaging and very embarrassing for the Liberal Party.
Quite possibly. Now, the assumption had been that the trial would proceed in August. There are some who say that was optimistic, that the wheels of justice grind slowly in Canada, and that the trial might not have taken place until after the election, in which case the Liberals would have been spared what presumably would have been at least embarrassing. Certainly, anytime you've got ministers of the Crown or former ministers of the Crown testifying in a criminal trial, it's not good news for the government of the day. But that will now presumably not happen. We should say that they didn't actually withdraw the charges, they just stayed them. And in theory, and that's an interesting question as to why they did that. Another question I don't have the answer to is why they stayed it rather than withdrew the charge. So in theory, they could still at some point decide to go to trial, but it would appear to be a very slight chance.